This is Talk of the Nation. I'm Neil Conan in Washington. At the moment, the U.S. is withdrawing forces from Iraq as the so-called surge winds down. The last of the extra troops that went to Iraq are scheduled to be out in July, and U.S. commanders propose what they call a pause before they decide what happens next. At the same time, the war is a major issue in the presidential campaign. Democrats Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton say they would end the war as quickly as possible and bring the troops home. Republican John McCain believes the U.S. cannot afford to fail in Iraq and would keep U.S. troops in combat as long as necessary. 5 years after the U.S.-led invasion, should we stay or should we go? Later in the hour, what are the Democrats going to do about Florida and Michigan? But first, the military issues behind the debate over the way ahead in Iraq. If you'd like to know more about the risks and prospects of rapid withdrawal or staying on, give us a call. We'd especially like to hear from those of you who've been in Iraq. We begin with Douglas Macgregor, a retired colonel and decorated combat veteran who served during the Gulf War. He's with us here in Studio 3A. And Colonel Macgregor, thanks for coming in today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
So do we stay or do we go?
I think we should announce our intention to completely withdraw from Iraq as soon as possible, something that was suggested, by the way, in the Baker-Hamilton Commission. And I don't think we can expect really any legitimate government to emerge in that country until it becomes clear that we're getting out. And I don't think you're going to see any effort inside the country to reach solutions until it's very clear that we are leaving. As long as we make it clear that we have no intention to leave, I fear we're reinforcing the division of the country and setting it up for worse violence than we've already seen.
And I'm sure you've heard the arguments that you're setting up a very risky situation. There still might not be reconciliation. You might leave chaos behind, and al-Qaeda might build a base in western Iraq.
Well, I think we need to keep something in mind. In a rather sort of perverse way, the Iranian government, our government, and al-Qaeda all seem to be enthusiastic about dividing Iraq along sectarian and ethnic lines. If you go back to world opinion polls that were taken at the end of last year, more than 80% of the Arab population wants to hold the country together, and more than half of the Kurdish population suggested that they wanted to hold Iraq together. So we have a majority of the population that wants to keep it together, but they're not really represented by Mr. Maliki and his government. He's really a minority government. His parties are really separatist parties. And Maliki, of course, is tied to Iran, and we are also sponsoring him and his forces. So you've got about 20% of the population that seems to think that Iraq would be better off divided for all sorts of reasons. And I think that we need to get out so that this imbalance in attitude can be rectified in our absence. So I don't subscribe to the nightmare scenarios. I don't see any evidence for a large Iranian army mobilizing on the border with Iraq, prepared to march in. They could not project much power over their own borders either. Certainly nobody from Saudi Arabia or Jordan is planning on intervening. The only people in the region that have the power to do much are the Turks, and of course their interests are limited to Kurdistan, and what they perceive to be, justifiably so, a threat to their national security.
Joining us now by phone from Cupertino, California, is Barry McCaffrey, a retired general who served in the United States Army for over 30 years and retired with 4 stars. General McCaffrey, good of you to be with us today.
Good to be with you, Neil.
And do we stay or do we go?
Well, I think Doug Macgregor's had a very sophisticated grasp of this whole problem all along, and there's a lot I would not disagree with in what he says. Practically speaking, I think the next administration, regardless of who wins, will rapidly understand that we're going to come out with the preponderance of our forces in the first 36 months. It's $10 billion a month. It was running 1,000 killed and wounded a month. Now it's probably down to 120 or so. There's no political support for the war. So one way or the other, the Iraqis and the U.S., the political leadership understands we're actually coming out. So the question is, under what with what end result? I think Doug's right. People on the ground wandering around in large urban Arab populations, 6 million people in Baghdad, there's going to be a lot less soldiers there before this administration leaves office, and we're going to start getting a notion. Can the Iraqi police, the national police, the local police, the army, hold this together, yes or no? I am mildly optimistic that they will do so. But again, that's a snapshot. I just got back from Iraq in December. You know, this brilliant General Dave Petraeus and our ambassador Ryan Crocker, who's enormously competent, There's a regional engagement that was lacking a year or so ago. We've got Secretary Bob Gates and Dr. Rice now talking to the Iranians and the Turks and the Saudis. So I'd be cautiously optimistic, but we're about to find out as the troop levels drop.
Would you be surprised, General McCaffrey, to see American forces in Iraq 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
No, I think if the Iraqis somehow craft a operative loose federal structure, which is where I think they're headed, and if the Iraqi security forces become a non-sectarian, a year and a half ago, the Iraqi police were terrorist organizations in uniform. So and now we've had this massive retraining, re-equipping, fired most of their leadership. So if they become an Iraqi national security force, I'd say we'll stay, and we might be there for a decade with modest troop levels, 20, 30, 40K. But again, it won't be counterinsurgency campaigns in Tikrit, Mosul, Basra, Baghdad. Instead, it's going to be a different function. I think if it cooks off on us, if it turns desperately ugly, if we go toward all-out civil war, which was happening right after the Samarra bombing, we were right on the verge of all-out civil war. If that peaks up, I think the reaction of the American people and the Congress will constrain our ability to stay, regardless of who's in office.
Let's get some callers in on the conversation. Our guests, retired General Barry McCaffrey, retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor. The question, should we stay or should we go? 800-989-8255. Email is talk@npr.org. And let's begin with Ben. Ben's with us from Portland, Oregon.
Hi, Neil. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
I actually think that we should stay, but my reason for we should stay is different than everyone else I've heard. I actually think we should stay because of the citizens in Iraq. If I could, I'd like to share a personal story of why. While we were over there, the second time I went over there was right during the start of major conflict, and as we were moving towards Baghdad, my convoy was able to go the whole entire time without any insurgent fire. I was in the very last vehicle watching the very end of all of everyone moving, and all the Iraqi citizens were waving at me, trying to get some monetary assistance. They either wanted food or American money or something. I had one little girl, I think she was about 5 or 6, wave at me with the scaredest look in her eyes, and while she couldn't see my face because I had goggles and a mask on, I waved at her with my non-weapon hand, and she actually smiled just a little. And out of all my memories there, that's the one that sticks out the most in my mind. And I think just for that one little girl, I would go back and I would do anything possible to help her.
I wonder how you respond to that, Colonel Macgregor.
Well, I think his depiction of the population with its handout is pretty accurate. We flooded much of Iraq, particularly the Sunni areas, since Petraeus arrived, with hundreds of millions of dollars, which is one of the reasons we've seen some downturn on the Sunni side in the violence, although I would argue that you still have substantial numbers of Iraqi Sunni insurgents who continue to refuse the money and continue to attack us, which is why we've seen our casualties inch up. We had 40 killed in January and a couple of hundred wounded. I don't know what the numbers are for February yet, and usually don't know for a few days. But I would say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and quite frankly, we can't fundamentally improve the lives of people in that country. You can make a good argument that since we arrived, things have gotten infinitely worse.